Conservative commentator Charles Krauthammer, with a vote on the $14.3 trillion federal borrowing limit, the so-called debt ceiling looming, former Governor Tim Pawlenty is calling on members of Congress to reject warnings of a government default to, quote, call their bluff.
Former Minnesota Governor Pawlenty is author of the new book, also, Courage to Stand, An American Story. And he joins us now from Minneapolis. Governor, I have to ask you right off the bat on this issue, the debt ceiling. I know you want to become more outspoken about it. You're pushing Congress to reject these calls for catastrophe. I'm sorry, I think we saw the same thing pre-TARP, the same thing, and then all of a sudden Congress voted against TARP the first time, and we got on the verge of an economic collapse even faster. So do you really think this is good for the American economy? Forget the politics of it a moment. It may be good politics. Is this good for the economy?
Well, I think it is, Chuck. And first of all, good morning to you and to Savannah. Thanks for having me on the show. And I am against raising the debt ceiling, but I'm also offering a reasonable third way, another idea that I think would help the debate, and it's this. President Obama is offering a false choice between more debt and defaulting on our obligations to the federal government's outside creditors. I think what we could do is send a bill to the president that would say we're going to eliminate that false choice, at least for the time being, and sequence the cash flow that we do have, which is substantial, and pay the outside creditors first on their debt, our debt payments and the interest, and then put the backside pressure on the debate on the discretionary spending that the federal government has. So the credit standing of the United States federal government would be met completely, and the time would be extended for the debate, and the backside pressure on the debate then would all focus on the discretionary spending. At a minimum, this would buy substantial amounts of time to really tackle the tough spending decisions that should be made and keep getting delayed in the federal government's debate and the Congress's debate.
But, Governor, does this not amount to you hoping that Congress comes together and cuts spending substantially enough to live within its means? I mean, you talk about calling the administration's bluff in terms of their apocalyptic predictions if the debt ceiling were not raised, but isn't it quite a gamble to ask that Congress make these draconian cuts in spending with, frankly, a gun to their head with the risk of default in the U.S. economy?
Well, we're not going to default, Savannah. First of all, again, you notice Secretary Geithner, when really pressed on this issue, doesn't say we're going to default. There's enough cash flow to meet the outside debt and credit obligations of the federal government.
For a time being, for a certain amount of time, correct?
Well, what's really at issue is the intergovernmental borrowing between accounts within the federal government. So you can pay the debt service obligations of the federal government with the cash flow for the near and intermediate and maybe for even a longer period of time. So we take the default issue off the table. That's the point of my proposal. And then say to the Congress, we'll sequence the spending, pay those debt obligations with the interest as they're due, make sure the military gets paid and taken care of, and then let's have the debate on entitlement reform that everybody always gets on your show and shows like this and say, Savannah, Chuck, it's time to make the tough decisions, and they never do. The only way that the politicians are going to make the tough decisions is to put their backs against the wall.
Well, your proposal gets them half of the way by saying, all right, don't raise the debt ceiling, pay the creditors first. Can you go the rest of the way and say how you would propose to cut spending sufficiently to stay within the debt ceiling as it stands?
Well, this is not going to be easy, and the only way to really tackle in a substantial way the financial problems of the United States federal government is to restructure entitlement programs, eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, which has got to be done. But the real issue here is the long-term entitlement and non-discretionary autopilot spending that the government engages in. And even if we could make some reasonable steps on that front, it would send a powerful signal, I think, to the markets and to the economy that we're going to be solvent and taking a more responsible approach going forward. But the point is, everybody flaps their jaw about making tough decisions. Nobody ever does. This is an opportunity, not a crisis. It's an opportunity to put the politicians back against the wall and actually get something done.
But, Governor, are you willing to put the economy, which is still in a fragile state? I mean, you yourself have understand the effects of an economic recession and what it does to, quote, revenues into the state. This is what you write in your book. You said, when the budget forecast came out in November 2008, it felt like I'd been thrown in the DeLorean in Back to the Future and shot right back to 2002. Despite all the reforms and reductions in spending, the economy had fallen far and fast, and our state budget was in big trouble. All of a sudden, you had a projection of a massive deficit. That's what you're having to leave the new governor, and it's simply because fewer people are working, fewer people are paying taxes. So is this the time to suddenly retract on government at this moment in time with what will happen if potentially what happens with the debt ceiling and this vote, even delaying it, doing what you're saying, the economic impact? Are you prepared for that?
Well, first of all, Chuck, I'm glad that you read my book. Thank you very much. I'm flattered that you took the time to do that. I appreciate it. It's called Courage to Stand. Number two.
Ding, ding, ding. Amazon.com, right? Yeah.
In Minnesota, we have a deficit because the spending is projected to go up 27%. That's ridiculous. Shouldn't happen, and therefore you can take care of it by just having a reasonable amount of spending. And then third, the premise that not raising the debt ceiling is, first of all, going to cause the United States federal government is wrong if you do what I just suggested. Make sure it's taken care of by sequencing the cash payments and sequencing how and when we pay the bills, with that being first, and then the military, and then have the debate about the rest. And then if we actually succeeded in having even a partial solution on entitlements and using this as the moment of pressure to get that done, I would suggest to you the intermediate and long-term outlook for the economy would be better, not worse. In fact, one of the things people worry about in the intermediate term is inflation and the fact that the federal government's pumped so much money into the economy, you're going to have an inflationary effect. And I would say this kind of approach would actually be a positive signal to the economy and to the outlook for the country.
Well, let's turn to your potential rival in 2012, Sarah Palin. She was on Fox News last night defending her use of the terms blood libel, among other things. You have said that Sarah Palin is a remarkable leader. What's remarkable about her?
Everything. I mean, she first of all led her state as a mayor and a governor and a pipeline commissioner, and she got a number of good things done there. She obviously has been a phenomenal force and voice in the conservative movement, the Republican Party, and in the country. And so, she's remarkable in all of those ways and others.
Is she a unifying force in your party?
Well, I think she is. I think, the party is a conservative party, and if you look not at everybody's variations in rhetoric and some policy differences, by and large, the party is a conservative party and agrees on most of the policy initiatives going forward. And she's somebody who's a very powerful voice in the conservative movement and is going to be going forward. And so it doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with her, but sometimes when you're changing cultures or changing things that are a political history or changing things that are significant policies, you're going to have conflict.
And, Governor, before we let you go, don't be coy. You're doing almost everything straight out of the playbook.
Iowa, check.
Yes, the book, check. To run for president. Why not just come right out and say it? Yes, I'm running for president.
Well, I am seriously considering it, Savannah, but I genuinely haven't decided. Finally, for this reason, it's a deeply personal decision, too. I have a family, and they have to bear the burden of this, and I want to make sure we've talked it through as a family. They understand the burdens associated with it, and so that's a very significant factor, and we'll continue to discuss that as a family. So I know you think I've already made up my mind, but I am seriously considering it, but I haven't finally decided.
Well, I think we're going to see you in Pella, Iowa in the next week. And people don't go to Pella, Iowa just to look for new windows. But that's, we'll see.
I'm not, Chuck, I'm not being coy about it. I'm seriously considering it. But okay. I'm telling you, it's something I am leaning towards. I'm seriously considering it. I just haven't made the final decision.
All right, Governor Pawlenty, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. I wanted to get into your near fisticuffs with Governor Ventura in the book. That was a fun little story, but I'll leave that as a tease for folks to go read your book because it's a fun little vignette that you share. So thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Savannah.
And we will be right back.